I'm having one of those dark nights of the soul right now where I take a long, hard look at my past and think, damn. But before I step into the deep deeps, I should talk about the person I met at the door.
I am math scientist. It's so cool, son of a bitch.
This is Okabe Rintaro, also known as the mad scientist Hououin Kyouma, leader of the Future Gadgets Laboratory in Steins Gate. The show is about some young people who stumble into making a microwave time machine and end up in a really unstable situation. The characters are all sort of misfits, hiding behind things: a mask to protect against loneliness, a phone for social anxiety, their own intelligence, 2D people, a friend, etc., to cover their unresolved insecurities. And the events of the story serve as an earthquake that reveals their gaping chasms of hurt and becomes an opportunity to heal. I had this ringtone for years. Okabe, Hououin Kyouma, became someone I identified with more than any other figure I can think of. I don't mean cosplaying over the years and having an Okabe poster or two. I did that. I mean seriously relating with Okabe because, like him, I was pretty neurotic. And like him, I wore a mask. Not a Kyouma mask, my own mask, but not too dissimilar to cover up my wounds. Steins Gate was a seismic event in my life, for reasons I wouldn't really start to understand until later, because it put me on a path to cracking open from my own neuroses, and helped me draw some conclusions about how to see my own choices in life. There's a pretty uncomfortable moment in episode 5, where Okabe is yelling at Kurisu, leaning over her in a clearly threatening way. Even though it becomes apparent there's no teeth to what he's saying, it is a seriously scary moment for Kurisu, especially considering her traumatic history with her insecure and vindictive father. And though we don't know about that at this point in the show, her reaction reveals deep-rooted tensions, as do the reactions and actions of many characters throughout, especially the first few episodes of the show. Okabe puts on an act to make Mayuri feel better after her grandmother's death and to keep from losing his friend, but when they actually make a time machine, suddenly the organization and that thing about the choice of Steins Gate, all that mad psychobabble that had been part of the act, all of it becomes real. Okabe is playing a game, but he's playing with real, unknown consequences, haphazardly ordering his friend Daru to hack and discern, and firing text messages into the past. If anybody sees the first half of Steins Gate as uneventful or filler, it's likely because of this. Consequential things are happening, we just don't understand the consequences because we're seeing through Okabe's eyes, and he's got a mask up that's obscuring his emotions and getting in his way of being able to process what they might really be getting themselves into. That's why the second half hits so hard, not just because we care about the characters by then, but because the consequences of their actions have piled up and all seem to occur at the same time. If we're attentive, there's a lot of foreshadowing to this. Kurisu and Okabe agree that Mayuri seems to see clearer than anyone in the lab and to have a sense of what they're getting themselves into. We see through Okabe's eyes though, not Mayuri's, so we get the experience of walking into the middle of a room of horrors, not really thinking about what could be in there, and then, boo, the lights turn on. And because of the way major events converge to occur across similar timelines in this universe, because the series follows Attractor field theory, where an attractor is a cluster of world lines like a rope that lead to a single converging point, Mayuri's death happens again and again and again and again. One moment when the consequences of what they're doing become frighteningly clear to Okabe is in the final scene of episode 9. Okabe feels disoriented, because it's setting in that things may have changed without him knowing what. The final scene is an intense looking again at Akihabara, in a sense that he doesn't know what exists and what doesn't anymore. Up through now, Okabe's priority has been to care for his friends, so he enabled them to send lovingly called DeLorean mails, into the past, causing a butterfly effect of changes that have drastically altered the world to the point that his own environment is hardly recognizable to him anymore. What has changed that we can't even see yet? Still though, he sends another D-mail to cheer Suzuha up after she doesn't find her dad at a time machine forum meetup. But the delay to Suzuha causes the time machine to break. She loses her memory for 24 years, fails in her mission to retrieve the IBM 100 computer, and kills herself out of guilt. As a result of trying to make his friends feel better, events are put into motion that kill Okabe's childhood friend Mayuri and ultimately lead to World War III. To stop that, he has to undo all of the messages that they've sent to the past. Because Rumiho used a D-mail to save her dad, Okabe literally has to ask Rumiho to let her dad die. He has to ask Rukako to change back into a guy, and Kurisu to die. Okabe was lonely. His Hououin Kyouma act gives him narrow purposes, like holding Mayuri hostage and fighting the organization, that give him strength, resolution, purpose, and courage. Mayuri, a cosplayer, understands this. In the visual novel in Rukako's ending, Mayuri explains that she wants Rukako to cosplay because when you cosplay, your usual self becomes another self. Rukako Urushibara is reserved and unconfident, and generally finds it difficult to express himself. Mayuri wants to see Rukako's character open up and expand. She wants to see Rukako explore himself through masks, because though masks can hide what's deeper, they can also be a way to go around trauma and anxiety or mental blocks and find a way to express anyway. Sometimes what you find can be very surprising. Suddenly the seriousness of what they've been stumbling into, time travel and CERN, an organization researching time travel to create a utopia, gets totally thrust on Okabe, interrupting any imaginative games about the organization or being a mad scientist. Now he's just a guy desperately trying to save his friend. But he'll start to realize that coming into the struggle with his mad scientist play, essentially fusing with his Hououin Kyouma persona so that it's no longer a distraction from reality, but a perfectly suited way to encounter reality, is the most effective way that he can save his friend. The way of Steins' Gate isn't to reject the Hououin Kyouma persona, it's to integrate it into reality. In a way, that's what I'm doing today during COVID, trying to get on track to the best possible future for myself by integrating my past with who I am and with the challenges that I face today. Hououin Kyouma enacts a purpose as a game that Lelouch v Britannia understands and uses intentionally as strategy, the use of a symbol. Hououin Kyouma becomes a symbol that's out of place in the regular world. He's maladapted, but when the world shifts to make Hououin Kyouma well-adapted, relevant, what's needed, the characters are able to rally behind the idea and symbol of the mad scientist. The delusions of Hououin Kyouma become an honest and brave desire to save the world from the evil clutches of an organization, CERN, and he becomes a founding member of a resistance that rallies behind that idealism, audacity, and bravery. In episode 23, Okabe receives a video from the version of himself that couldn't save Kurisu. The video's 15 years from the future, telling him to deceive time. So he grabs a glow stick filled with a red liquid and decides he's going to spill it as fake blood to make himself in the past think that he saw Kurisu dead. That way his actions in the past will remain the same, but Kurisu will live. But when he gets there, it turns out the red liquid has dried out, and in order to deceive time, he needs to make a real sacrifice. So he does something mad. He gets himself stabbed and then spills his own blood over an unconscious Kurisu. A dialogue in episode 22 is especially telling about Okabe's play acting. Okabe suddenly gives a Pyrrhic victory speech in his Hououin Kyouma persona, having erased the first D-mail and gone back to the world line where Kurisu dies, and he is a broken man. Mayuri's response to this is to tell him that she's okay now, so Okabe can cry for himself now. What she's saying is that Okabe no longer needs to worry about cheering her up by putting on an act, because Mayuri feels emotionally stable now. Okabe doesn't need to act anymore. He can reveal and process the real hurt that he's been holding. I think what sets most of us apart isn't whether we hide behind something, but what we hide behind. What gives us comfort that if the ground were to go out from under our feet, might reveal a chasm within us that our coping mechanism has been covering up, and which, in the thick of it, we may find more ways to hide, or through confronting that chasm, start to heal. Steins' Gate introduces a bunch of characters that are misfits, each hiding behind something, and then gives us Yugo Tennoji, Mr. Brown, a character who will take on the persona of whoever a person needs the most to get them to do the dirty work for the Rounders, a mercenary group employed by CERN. In the world of Steins' Gate, this is such a terrifying antagonist, because it's one that preys on characters' emotional weaknesses. Tennoji targets people who are sufficiently detached from society that they can be manipulated according to their emotional needs. Daru, Kurisu, Okabe, and Mayuri cover up their emotional wounds with coping mechanisms, and so does Mooka. But hers is the fake mother figure she finds in FB, Tennoji's persona, whose goal is really to manipulate her. Kiryu Mooka becomes isolated without real friends or family to support her, so she becomes vulnerable to someone who acts like a parent. She conflates her virtual connection with FB with human connection, and that with truth, meaning to her, FB becomes a surrogate mother. Tennoji is able to overwhelm Mooka's emotional weakness, causing her to become addicted and dependent, willing to do anything for FB's approval. And when Mooka isn't needed anymore, FB breaks off contact with her, and she kills herself. Though Mooka fulfills the role of an antagonist when she appears as the head of the Rounders squad that attacks the lab and kills Mayuri, the real antagonist here is the complex combination of technology dependence and social isolation that makes her vulnerable to emotional exploitation. And further, the desperate need for a livelihood that made Tennoji vulnerable to recruitment of the Rounders in the first place. Both Mooka and Tennoji are exploited by powers stronger than them that overwhelm them. Confronted with horrible events that keep occurring, Okabe's first impulse is to attribute it to his playful phrase for fate, Steins' Gate, but he immediately catches himself and realizes he doesn't actually believe that. He doesn't want to. With a microwave time machine at his fingertips, he can't simply accept that Mayuri is going to die. So he tries to do anything to change that. But the way major events on similar world lines converge together, it begins to seem like the whole world is conspiring to kill Mayuri. Okabe's experience has now aligned more with the delusions that he's talked about. He refuses now to accept fate because it means Mayuri's death. So, like a mad scientist, he's going to change fate. He's gonna fight God, or hear that sense that things are fixed according to a higher law. When Okabe first brings up Steins' Gate, he's trying to process a difference in memories in the first episode. He remembers being at a time machine research conference at a radio building, seeing a dead Makise Kurisu, rushing out, sending Daru a text, and then the world shifting and suddenly the streets empty. Something's crashed into the radio building and the press conference has been cancelled. He decides, unconvincingly, that it's the choice of Steins Gate, something that he's made up, that's part of the act. It isn't rooted in experience, it doesn't have any resolving meaning, it's not something that anyone takes seriously. That he's able to keep up that persona shows that at that moment, he's removed enough from the situation to interpret it in a way that isn't based in experience, unlike immediately after it happens, when he finds Mayuri and has lost the act completely. But as Okabe learns that he can change fates that seemed fixed by altering major events, Steins Gate starts to mean not the uncontrollable force of fate, but the world line that Okabe strives to reach, where World War III doesn't occur and Kurisu and Mayuri live. As he goes on this journey to change fate, Okabe has truly isolating experiences as a time traveler because he's building memories that others don't really share. He's living outside the usual constraints of time, which would make him separate from all of humanity. If it weren't for a character who's always able to understand and empathize with what he's going through, Makise Kurisu, where Okabe's interactions with others get formulaic at times because of his inability to be present there with them, his interactions with Kurisu are always fresh and have some sense of continuity. And then the realization undoing the last D-mail that it had prevented Kurisu's death hits like a truck, and it's something that in reviewing I totally forgot until that episode. Maybe it's because of the constant thrill and feeling of being totally present in the moment of the scenes of each episode and incapable of thinking so far forward just as Okabe is going step by step. Maybe it's how much I grow to appreciate Kurisu's character and don't want her to die, even though she literally dies in the first episode. Then at the end, that after reaching the Steins Gate world line where Kurisu survives, that they would still meet, that the world would, according to its logic, converge so that they could meet, is so romantic. It's so romantic. Steins Gate explores this idea that without major changes, many major events can be bound to happen, but that even with those things that seem totally unavoidable, fated, there can be a path that we can find, a Steins Gate, where the world as we're trying to make it can come into being. Could it be that because of Steins Gate, I couldn't accept the fixedness of a concept like fate? I was uneasy about fate growing up. I grew up in a cult. My immediate family and I left it when I was young, and I was left with a conflict. I was used to people talking about fate as though it was an inevitable thing that couldn't be changed. But I also had an intuitive sense that different choices made different outcomes. For me, believing in fate would become the same as absolving myself of responsibility for the things I could make choices about, and instead choosing not to take the blame for my role in the outcomes. What Steins Gate helped me realize was the sense that of all the possible outcomes out there, there are some that are far better and harder to get than others, but that however hard, they're worth fighting for. To say this outcome is the choice of Steins Gate is to say it's Okabe's and the world's choice. It's the choice all the lab members fought for in conjunction with the laws of this universe. In 2014, when I first got into anime, I wrote a sentimental note to myself. When I look back to this time, I see stuff that really makes me somber, like a short YouTube playlist of anime music videos called When You Can't See Beauty Anywhere Else, that I'd return to often to give myself courage and motivation for the coming day. That note said, remember Clannad, remember Steins Gate, remember Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Remember SAO, Death Note, Code Geass, MLP. Remember all of these things. Remember what they've taught you. Remember what they've made you feel and what they've helped you realize. Remember the stories that make you what you are. Become the good in all of them. It's an artifact like this that affirms to me just how important these shows were to me at that time and in that moment that I was in. And now, with the gift of time, I can look back and try to understand how these shows affected me, and try, bit by bit, to discover why they meant so much to me. This is a work of tracing my influences. It's part of a larger reminder to myself, I think, that everything we do has its own importance and shouldn't be underestimated. It should be integrated into our understanding of ourselves. Otherwise, we won't know what's really affecting us to make the choices that we make. If there's anything that Steins Gate has taught me, it's that by integrating your whole self, you can become more of a master of your own fate. Now the gatekeeper has stepped aside, and I see into a world of things that, at critical points in my life, have been there and have shaped me into who I am. Okabe understands something about ritual. It's a way of connecting the past with the present through repetition. It can be the transition into the sacred space of a round table. It can also be a series of movements that, through repetition, gains life and meaning. Maybe this is a pie in the sky and too much to ask for, but if you send a video of yourself doing this to hououjojo@gmail.com, after I've gotten enough, I will put together a compilation, a tribute to the mad scientist, Hououin Kyouma. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, record a silly video, and close YouTube and do something else. The world is beautiful, and you deserve to live your own life in it, not one chosen for you by YouTube's algorithm. See you next time.